10-year-old Emma had spent her entire life in an orphanage. She had watched many children leave with happy families while she remained behind, hoping that one day someone would choose her too. That day finally came. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, one of the wealthiest couples in town, arrived at the orphanage looking for a daughter. They had everything: wealth, a grand mansion, expensive clothes, but no children. When they saw Emma, their faces lit up. "She's perfect," Mrs. Hamilton whispered. Emma's heart pounded with excitement as they took her home. Their mansion was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Golden chandeliers, velvet curtains, and servants who bowed when they passed. "You are our little princess now," Mr. Hamilton said, placing a tiara on her head. For the first time, Emma felt like she belonged. For 2 years, Emma lived like royalty. She had the finest dresses, the best tutors, and a family that adored her. But everything changed when Mrs. Hamilton gave birth to a son, Oliver. At first, Emma was excited. She had always wanted a sibling. But as Oliver grew, the Hamiltons' love for her faded. One day, Emma walked into the living room to find her portrait, once hanging proudly above the fireplace, replaced with Oliver's. She swallowed hard. "What happened to my picture?" Mrs. Hamilton barely looked at her. "Oliver is the real heir now. We must focus on him." Real heir? Emma tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, but things only got worse. At first, it was small things. Her fancy dresses were taken away. She was moved to a smaller room. The servants, who once treated her like a princess, now ignored her. Then, one morning, everything changed. Mrs. Hamilton placed a broom in Emma's hands. "You should start earning your place here." Emma's hands trembled. "But I thought I was your daughter." Mr. Hamilton sighed. "That was before Oliver. Now we don't need you as much." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "So I'm just a servant now." Mrs. Hamilton smirked. "Exactly." From that day on, Emma's life became a nightmare. Oliver, who used to call her big sister, now treated her like dirt. "Fetch my shoes," he ordered. "Clean my room," he demanded. "You're not part of this family," he sneered. Emma wanted to scream, but she held her pain inside. Months passed, and Emma realized something. The Hamiltons had never truly loved her. She was just a decoration to them, someone to show off. Now that Oliver was here, she was worthless. One night, after finishing all her chores, she overheard 2 servants talking. "The Hamiltons only adopted her to look generous," one whispered. "They never planned to keep her forever," the other replied. Emma clenched her fists. She had spent years believing she was their daughter. But she was just a showpiece, discarded when she was no longer needed. She had to leave. That night, she packed her few belongings and sneaked out through the servants' entrance. She ran as fast as she could, away from the mansion that had once felt like home. Part 5. A New Beginning. Emma wandered through the cold streets until she reached the bakery owned by an elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson. The kind woman took one look at Emma and pulled her inside. "You're safe here, child." Emma didn't cry. She had wasted too many tears on the Hamiltons. Instead, she worked hard in the bakery, learning how to make bread and cakes. One day, a wealthy merchant visited the shop. He was impressed by Emma's kindness and determination. "I want to sponsor your education," he said. Years later, Emma became a successful businesswoman. She owned a chain of bakeries, known for their warmth and generosity. Then, one day, she heard the news. The Hamiltons had lost everything. Their business had failed, and they were now struggling to survive. Emma visited their small, run-down home. When they saw her, their eyes filled with hope. "Emma," Mrs. Hamilton whispered, "you're rich now. Can you help us?" Emma smiled. "I could," she said, "but I only help family." And with that, she turned and walked away, never looking back.